If you are a Sega Saturn owner, you know that its library is loaded with fighting games. 2D, 3D, and even hybrids of the two are well represented. It's got games from the likes of Capcom, SNK, Sunsoft, Midway, Atari, Atlas, Data East, Tecmo, and of course Sega itself. It was one of the main reasons I was so invested in the platform. Back in the mid-90s, I was an arcade-going fool, and fighting games took up a huge portion of my time. Since many of those same games were coming home to the Saturn, I just knew it was going to be the platform for me. Things started off like a champ too. Sega had its Virtua Fighter games ready in the first year, and then the 2D stuff started to land. The X-Men, Alpha, and Dark Stalker series got some great ports that really bolstered my confidence in the Saturn's capabilities to do these kinds of games justice. I was also in love with the controller for fighting games. The 6-button face and smooth D-pad lent itself well to fireball and uppercut motions, helping me hone my skills and enjoy these games as much as possible. When newer stuff began to tax the hardware's capabilities to the max, Sega released a 1MB extended RAM cartridge to help, resulting in even more impressive home ports that looked and played incredibly well. But in late 1996, Capcom had released a new kind of fighter than what it had previously done. Taking many of the assets and tweaking some of the formulas of its Marvel and Street Fighter series, a tag team contest was born featuring 2-on-2 action. X-Men vs. Street Fighter was a fast, combo-laden affair featuring huge sprites, tons of animation, and stages that often had different scenes as the battle raged on. It was initially a topic of conversation amongst my friends. Could any home system even do the arcade justice? That question would indeed be answered when Sega announced a brand new extended RAM cartridge, now a whopping 4MB. X-Men vs. Street Fighter would be its first game, launching with it as a pack-in November of 1997. And oh my god, did it blow me the hell away. As you all know, the biggest feature here that set itself apart from the previous Capcom games is the anytime tagging in and out of your second character. You choose two fighters at the beginning, which covers popular entries from both Marvel and Capcom. For the X-Men, you get Magneto, Juggernaut, Sabretooth, Storm, Gambit, Rogue, Wolverine, and Cyclops. On the Street Fighter side, you get Dhalsim, M. Bison, Chun-Li, Zangief, Cammy, Charlie, Ryu, Ken, and finally Akuma. M. Bison is under his Japanese moniker of Vega, where Charlie is also known as Nash. You can mix and match any of these fighters. Good guys, bad guys, X-Men, or Street Fighters, it doesn't matter. Once you jump into battle, you are faced with a number of revisions from previous Capcom fighting games. Making its way back is the Super Combo Gauge, or Hyper Combo Gauge as it's known here. This builds up as the fight goes on, where as many as 3 can be stored and used anytime you want. Your options to use it include the Hyper Combo, which is a high damage move that typically hits your opponent multiple times. There's also a new form of Hyper Combo called the Variable Combination, which is essentially both fighters dropping their Hyper Combos all at once, consuming 2 full levels of the gauge. This can be a vicious finisher if used correctly and can obliterate half a life bar. Each fighter also has access to super jumps, which allows you to jump 2 screens high, as well as aerial raves, which are vicious air combos that start by popping your opponent into the air and then allowing you to hit them multiple times or juggle them further with even more attacks or hyper combos. The tag team aspect also has a life replenishment feature. As you take damage, you'll notice that your life bar has a sort of shadow. This is the amount of life you can heal back should you tag out and rest. You must remain out of the contest to receive the full healing bonus, because once you tag back in, that's it. Your life bar is what it is. Should a fighter fall in battle, his partner is automatically tagged in for the match to continue. Once a team has been deprived of both life bars, the fight is over.
Tornado Claw! Optic Blast! Let's go! Gene Slice! Gene Slice!
The arcade version of X-Men vs. Street Fighter had been originally done on the CPS2 hardware, running a then massive 320 megabits of ROM. While this board had been around since 1993, it could still display thousands of on-screen colors, hundreds of sprites at once, and had some pretty beefy sound capabilities to boot. Even 3 years later, X-Men vs. Street Fighter was an eye-catching 2D experience that was extremely impressive. To see it running on the Saturn with the animation intact was something I still remember fondly all these years later. While the Saturn conversion does feature a difference in resolution that makes the fighters appear larger, sitting the two side by side reveals just how close this was. The added RAM of the new cartridge makes all the difference in the world for these kinds of games. Instead of losing the large characters and getting half the frames of animation, we get a visually accurate rendition of the original arcade in all its glory. Backgrounds are just as lively and feature the scene changes present in the original. Hyper combos play out in gorgeous explosions of light and color, every bit as impressive as before. Even the massive sprite of Juggernaut comes in just as large and imposing as the arcade equivalent. You haven't lived until you've seen a great Juggernaut versus Juggernaut matchup. Typically when an arcade game had been ported to home systems, it came with a huge list of visual compromises. But here, it was a new era of gaming, and the Saturn was up to the challenge. The cue sound of the arcade version makes its way to the Saturn in fine form as well. The music here is solid and many of the tracks are quite memorable. I won't waste a lot of time with more of my opinions. Let's just have a listen so you can decide for yourselves. I won't mince words here. I loved this game at the time of its release. It was crazy fast, flashy, and I loved the fighters they chose to include. The combos were cool, the finishers fun, and the graphics and sound were exactly what I had been wanting now that 32-bit development was maturing. It was magical, and my best friend and I played the ever-loving hell out of it. We dumped hours upon hours into its brand of fun, trying different fighter combinations and beating it with all of them. I could leave my opinion there, but I'd be doing you all a disservice not to mention the things I didn't quite like about the experience. First, there are some pretty major balancing issues with some of the fighters. If you play multiplayer against a seasoned veteran, there are some choices here that you'll never touch because they are damn near useless. All fighting games have some level of trouble with overpowered moves, but here, it can be to the detriment of your enjoyment. The first time you get thrown into the air and don't come back down until your entire life bar is gone, you'll see what I mean. Those that mainly play against the CPU and their non-competitive friends will likely enjoy this a lot more. There are also some pretty egregious hit detection issues, particularly on the larger fighters. There are moves that can go through 90% of the sprite and never make any contact. It can be infuriating until you get used to it. I also came to despise the final battle against Apocalypse. Oh, I was amazed at first with his giant head and arm taking up the entire screen, but this fight becomes a bore fest with repeated playthroughs. I would have much preferred a single overpowered fighter to take down as a boss. You do get to fight your partner at the end, but this doesn't feel nearly as special as a dedicated boss encounter. Some of you may also be less impressed with this had you been into Capcom's previous Marvel games. Most of what you see here came from X-Men Children of the Atom and Marvel Superheroes, so the gameplay isn't exactly brand new. But none of those things ruin the game. Hell, none of these things hurt my overall love of the experience at all, really. It was loud, beautiful, and loaded with personality, giving it an appeal that stood firmly on its own away from Capcom's other efforts. With X-Men vs. Street Fighter getting a ton of attention in gaming magazines at the time, it was clear to Capcom that it would sell well in both North American and PAL regions, so they announced intentions to localize the game in those areas. Of course, that was before Sega completely pulled the rug out from underneath the platform in 1998. Once it was clear that Sega had no intentions of releasing the extended RAM cartridge outside of Japan and Capcom would have to do it alone, their interest in doing it vanished. A port did show up for the PlayStation afterwards, but I'll not sully this video with what I can only describe as a laughable attempt to get something playable out. What was interesting is that this is one of the first import games I had ever seen sold at a major retailer. Both Babbage's and Electronics boutiques sold this in their stores, brand new, for Saturn owners to buy. They even sold the adapter that allowed you to play it on a US system. This was stunning to me and a sad development for my favorite gaming system ever. For a chain retailer to have more confidence in the platform than the company that made it really said a lot for how far Sega had fallen. In fact, more import games would be sold at US retailers that year thanks to interest games like this generated. X-Men vs. Street Fighter was just the start of the Versus series, and the Saturn would see its direct sequel, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, in 1998. This kept the Saturn going well past its Western demise, and I was grateful for it. Sega may have given up on it, but its fans rode off into the sunset with some truly great titles, and X-Men vs. Street Fighter was definitely one of them. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.